Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Last time I talked about my entire story as an attractions cast member in Tomorrowland, as well as all my guest interaction stories from all three of my attractions that I worked. I also talked about what it was like working Star Tours in the previous episode. If you want to go check out any of those videos, a card probably just popped up to listen to a playlist of all of those videos. We are on the second episode of what my working the attractions arc is for this little podcast series I got going on here. This episode will obviously be focused on Autopia. Now, just for some context for those of you unaware, Autopia was the first attraction I worked, and I hired into this attraction in May of 2019. I worked it pretty much exclusively until a month before the pandemic shut down all the parks and such, and then worked it off and on after returning from the pandemic. This episode will be covering what it was like working this attraction from my perspective, and just sort of a general overview of the daily operations. I will not be covering guests in this video, and this video will be solely focused on the Autopia attraction. As always, this video will have chapters in the description or on the video itself if you want to skip around. Just a friendly reminder that this is a podcast, and only somewhat related B-roll footage will be on screen, as it's more meant for listening purposes and not watching purposes. I also recommend having somewhat of a basic knowledge of Autopia, and I do have a video that covers the surface level operations of that attraction if you never experienced this attraction. Anyway, with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and get our engines revved or something. Okay, that was a bad joke. Just let's start this video. Daily CM life. First things first, the daily CM life. This will be somewhat repeated information if anyone listened to the Star Tours episode, but with slight details changed. Let's just start with a quick rundown of what it's like working any attraction. You already need to be in uniform before showing up for your shift. I would just wear my uniform before I left my house and commute in my costume. We were allowed to take them home, but you couldn't go around flaunting it in public for obvious reasons. Yeah, running into the store really quick was fine, and I was more comfortable in this costume than I was in my Star Tours one. I got less weird looks when I was out in public wearing it. Besides that, we would park in one of the mini cast lots and either walk or take the customer shuttle to our lands backstage. Autopia is in the far east side of the park, tucked away behind or next to the Finding Nemo of Submarines. You might have passed it on your way if you ever gotten off the train in Tomorrowland, as the station is actually right next to Auto. I would normally come out from behind the bathrooms behind the Autopia Winter Circle, as it's literally right next to the attraction. I've also come in through different ways, like I said before, like through Fantasyland or over near the Tomorrowland Theater, but I won't get into details as you don't need to know where the secret backstage entrances are for this video, and don't go back there. Just know if you do see them, don't go in there unless you work there. Just figure I mentioned that for legal and safety reasons. I would usually show up about 30 minutes early and wait in the backstage break rooms until it was roughly about 10 minutes before my shift. There's also this little VIP area underneath the tower building in the Autopia attraction that sometimes has been open, but it's very infrequent of when it actually is open, and that's something I will be covering in a bit. Just say it was for special occasions most of the time. Right behind that VIP area is our lead office, and that's where we would clock in and get our assignments. It was also known as the pit. When you would get an assignment, it could be a few different things. The most common was the beginning of rotation, which I will get into a moment, or someone's break or clock out time. You see, CMs are only usually in the position they are at for about 20 to 40 minutes depending on staffing. Now this will be from a full-time employee perspective, working 8 hours. You get paid 2 15-minute breaks, and you get 1 30-minute lunch in the middle that's unpaid, of course. Basically, every 2 hours we would get a break from working. This should be sort of obvious if you've ever worked any job, but I know some labor laws are different, especially in different states and or countries. You would work your entire shift, take your breaks, and then clock out and leave. A nice part about this is that you would actually clock out 20 minutes before your scheduled time, as Disney would pay us for our walk time back to our vehicles. So you would clock out at, let's say, 11:10, and you would be getting paid up into your scheduled off time of 11:30. Just as an example, of course. We also had options of early releasing and overtime. Depending on staffing, sometimes we could request to go home early or longer than our scheduled shifts, but that's the labor budgets, and I will sort of go into that in my lead video, which will be the last video of this arc. We also had the ability to trade shifts or give away shifts. Let's just say I trade with my coworker, they worked my Friday and I worked their Saturday, or I want a night shift and they want my morning shift on the same day. There was also the ability to just straight up give away shifts, but they were limited to 6 per year and 3 for part-timers, but possibly more depending on manager approval. Now, just a side note, this actually went up to 12 for full-time and 8 for part-time with their new contract that just, they almost want to strike for. Anyway, let's go ahead and move over to the positions of Autopia. Positions. Every attraction has specific areas that we stand in or tasks that we do. The most common example would be your grouper, the person that gives you a number or row to stand on. I will be covering all the ones that are at this attraction, but won't be going into too much detail for legal and safety reasons. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you how to restart the cars or how to side pedal, because you can see cast members doing that, but that doesn't mean you should. We're going to work our way through the attraction from entrance to exit. Starting out with the obvious is the greeter area. This person and their job is to check height requirements and then get asked the same question of where lightning lane is, because it's not actually out in the front of the attraction like others are. The lightning lane is actually inside the queue itself because it was a rush job to add it in and make the lives of cast members much harder and guests extra hard because, management is so nice. With my personal opinions out of the way, there may be another cast member out front, but they'll be most likely reparking the massive amounts of strollers that like to block the walkway. This position is usually not picked up because most days staffing is a big issue, and it was very common at this attraction. Now moving on to as if you are walking the queue, you'll eventually make your way to a split in the attraction. You'll see a cast member standing underneath the umbrella next to some scanners. This is the lightning lane cast member, and they are basically scanning people in. If you don't have this, then you'd move further down the queue on the standby side. Now, this all works on paper, but if you know how customer service is and how guests are nowadays, this would always cause a massive crowding issue, and it didn't help that there's also a split on these different sided tracks, but I won't get into that here as I already had a whole side tangent on my surface level operations video. There may also be another cast member here to help with the crowds, but again, this attraction always had staffing issues. Now as you move more into the queue, you'll be met with a merge point where lightning lane and regular standby guests meet. Obviously this is the merge cast member, but there's also another one in this area that has a radio. They oversee operating the lift and dealing with any guests that come up the exit. Now sometimes you might see the merge cast member holding a radio, and that's a rare case if they are severely understaffed, and this causes another can of, headaches, as guests will just go wherever they want when they're not directed. Now we're going to jump over to the tracks. There are 4 tracks with 2 little platforms, 2 tracks on each side. They each have a grouper and 4 to 6 cast members on those track areas, 2 to 3 on each side. I will be covering the grouper in just a moment, but let's talk about the track cast members first. Their job is to make sure everyone stays in their box until the cars are ready to go, as well as inform the grouping cast member if any parties came down the lift or stairs. They are also in charge of giving safety spills before guests drive off. They used to make sure your seatbelt was buckled and wouldn't come undone, as well as tell you not to bump before sending you on your way, because of all the issues and people hopping out of their cars, so now they have to stay in your vehicle at all times on top of their 2 other tasks. So thank you for hopping out of your vehicle so much to my guests that don't understand road safety. Now going back over to the grouping cast member, and this is weirdly my favorite position to work at this attraction. They basically put guests on numbers 1 through 6 on a correlating color. While there are 4 tracks, the grouping cast member on both platforms only group 2 of the 4 when available. They oversee the red and blue or orange and green. They may also group up to number 8, but they only do set rows 7 and 8 for courtesy reasons or when they have higher demand for it. But again, this is not usually the case for staffing and demand and just car availability. Now this is a stressful position because guests are guests and they will get a little bit of freedom here. The cast member is supposed to walk up and down their platform as they finish a row to make sure everyone is standing where they're supposed to be, but you can imagine that some cast members are lazy and they won't do that, which causes a backup of guests and such. I already went on a whole side tangent in my surface level operations video, but I also did one in my decline of the Disney parks video if you haven't seen that as well, which is not in this playlist, but I would recommend checking that out if you're bored. Moving on to inside the attraction, there is usually one cast member that wanders the entire attraction to help with stalls or children struggling with pedals. There might be also another that wanders the attraction, but again, not usually utilized due to, staffing and demand, but it's normally staffed on like grad nights or heavier crowd days like summertime and the winter holiday season. On top of this wanderer, there's also a cast member that is stationed over in the off-road area near the Matterhorn. They are always stationed in this area and they need to be bumped out like the tower position at Star Tours. Moving on to the last position, and that's as you come back into the station. They are the position that waves cars into the station. So that traffic jam meme you always see about this attraction, it's probably this area. Now, they normally sit in 6 cars at a time, but of course they may do more or less depending on what the grouper needs in that moment. Also, yes, sometimes guests will just speed past this guy and they usually sit in the sun behind the cars that are just unloading. So wait until you're told to go. There are also other floating and optional positions that I didn't mention, as the ones I talked about are already the main positions. The most common floater position is one that's just giving out water breaks to those out on the attraction, but it's not one that's exactly noticeable to the average guest. It's also not exactly a position and just what they call an optimal task, meaning do something productive to 10 to 20 minutes. This ranges from the water breaks to picking up trash, as well as parking strollers and assisting the removal or addition of a vehicle. Now that you pretty much got the gist of this weirdly complex attraction, we're going to move on to the next part of this episode. What is that next part? Well, it's about opening and closing procedures of the attraction, of course. Let's go ahead and jump into that right now. Opening and closing procedures. Every attraction has both their opening and closing procedures. They basically make sure everything is up and functional in the morning before the parks open, and make sure everything is put away and off for closing. Every attraction has different ways of doing their own procedures, and I will be only talking about the ones that I worked. Obviously, this video specifically is on Autopia. Starting off with opening procedures. Bright and early at 5 in the morning was to wash some cars. Yep, you heard that right. They wash the cars every single morning. Granted, this is not all the time, as weather stuff happens, and as well as sometimes it's more of a spray down with a spray bottle sort of day. Let's just say for the sake of the video, this is how we normally wash down the cars a vast majority of the times. Basically, one cast member would pressure wash all the vehicles down, and the other 2 would come in and dry them with a little towel or rag. They would only wipe down the outside body, but sometimes the seats and their seatbelts would get a little wet. You may also see cast members with towels upon opening, as they might be wiping down some of the seats, but I don't know how many of you listening go on Autopia for your first ride of the day upon park opening. Anyway, there are also 3 other openers and a bunch of floaters. Aside from the car washers, these cast members do checks on and around the attraction. We will start with the first opener. They usually come in around 7ish and do grab a checklist. Their job is to make sure all the cars on tracks 1 and 2 are all good. Tracks 1 and 2 are the red and blue respectively. They basically go to every single car, make sure the buckle buckles, grab the rail so it doesn't come out loose, and make sure the steering wheel steers. They also turn on all the cars, but don't just start them yet. They also move the first cars on the tracks 1 and 2 past the track switches, as they are the pilot cars for doing a show check in the morning. After checking all of their cars on the 2 tracks, they do the same thing on the track 1 and 2 storage areas, and then walk the attraction on those same 2 tracks to make sure everything is all good. Basically, all effects are working, the fire extinguishers are all good around your tracks, and make sure nothing is blocking the ride's vehicle path, like a downed branch or something. They also make sure the doors around the attraction are locked and other backstage stuff that you don't really need to know about. They also check the PA system on the track's return area and make sure the communications devices are working on their grouping platform. Then that's their checklist pretty much done. Now on to the second opener. They pretty much do the same exact thing, but they oversee tracks 3 and 4. Tracks 3 and 4 are tracks orange and green respectively. Anyway, the only thing they do differently from the first opener is grab a tow rope and put it in the off-road area next to the Matterhorn. I will explain the tow rope in a bit more detail, but just know it's used for any cars that stall out and such. Besides that, the second opener eventually works their way back to the station, where we head over to opener 3. The third opener is sort of the attraction and queue checker. They make sure all the Lightning Lane kiosks are set up, make sure the height requirements are all good, and make sure the PA systems are working for in the queue. They also check for any debris and other stuff, sort of already explained like this in my Star Tours episode. They pretty much do the same thing as them. Oh yeah, remember those floaters I talked about earlier? Well, let's mention them really quickly before we get on to closing. These floaters assist the lead by adding cars to the respective tracks from the storage area, as well as get them all staged for the morning. Basically, all the cars are bumper to bumper during closing procedures, and these floaters move all the cars up to their actual number spots, so it's easier for guests to get in. They are also in charge of doing the cycle of the pilot cars that I mentioned earlier, and it will do a show check of the 4 cars that are staged. They drive these around the entire attraction before coming back to the secondary track switches. The reason they stop here is so they can control the flow of traffic when opening tracks later in the day, which is something I will get into in a moment. Now on to closing procedures. Closing at this attraction is cakewalk compared to opening. They close tracks slowly as the night goes on, and eventually go down to 1 track before closing. Obviously, Autopia is based off guest demand, and I have never ever seen all 4 tracks running very close to closing. I have seen 2, but never all 4. Besides that, the way they close the attraction is by removing all cars off the tracks until their respective storage track is full. Once the storage is full, they go on to the bumper to bumper method on each track and put a little brake clip on each of the cars. They skip the first and last car, and the reason they put the brake clips on the car is so the pedal gets a little break during the night. Something to do with the fluids and stuff, and brake stuff. I'm not 100% sure. I don't really remember. They don't do the first and last cars, so the cars don't move around once they have the brake clip on, so they can easily, move without a push. You may see them put one on when removing a vehicle with the car jack, but again, something I'll get into later. Yeah, I know closing isn't as exciting as opening, but that's pretty much the gist of it before we move on to the next few chapters. If you are really interested, I would recommend riding Autopia for your last ride of the night and see how they close up their tracks and such. You'll get a very interesting experience being the last rider of the night, and I won't spoil it here. I know that Autopia is a ride that not a lot of people go out of their way for, but I promise you, you will not be waiting super long if you ride at park closing. Anyway, let's get on to the next chapter. Working environment. There were 3 periods of time at Autopia that I worked at. There was the pre-pandemic period, the reopening period, and the newbie overload period. I can tell you firsthand that the first period was the bliss period of working this attraction. The second was reuniting with my work family, all while the last period was exactly as it sounds. Newbies were getting trained every single week for a very, very long period of time, up until I ended up leaving the company. I will be covering what it was like working each of them in just a moment. Now, pre-pandemic and the work environment during this time was bliss for me. Yeah, there were a few new hires that did have some issues, but they were nothing compared to the ones post-pandemic. Everyone worked this attraction, and we were apparently the most efficient and self-sufficient attraction in the land. Basically, everyone knew what they were doing, and we were all willing to help each other out. It wasn't a sink or swim mentality here, no matter the time of day you worked. I'm sure there was some dramas and such going on, but it never crossed my path, to be honest. All of my coworkers were very friendly, and the new hires were willing to take advice from myself and others. Overall, this was my favorite attraction to work up until a month before the parks closed. The reason was because it was my only attraction, and I worked there for over 8 months. I honestly didn't mind it, but once I got monorail, I liked having that balance of 3 days over there and 2 days at Auto. Now, the other reason I stopped wanting to work this attraction, aside from the new attraction that I just learned, was because they just implemented a crappy FastPass system a few weeks prior to closing. Imagine the current setup, but without the scanners. We literally had to use the park-provided phones to scan everyone's ticket individually, and that was a headache on its own. Thanks, MaxPass. Now, returning from the pandemic was great, all for a week or 2, but you could tell it was different. A lot of my coworkers from Autopia never returned, as they found new jobs or just had to move back home. There were also a bunch of people from other attractions or different departments working here, so there was a little bit of a clash between the regulars and others. I ended up getting Star Tours about a month after returning from the pandemic, so I started to work both up until monorail reopened later that October. This time was working both Autopia and Star Tours was great, as I didn't have any issues with coworkers and guests weren't too crazy yet. That all changed when the first batch of new hires started to come in. I want the record to state that not all new hires were terrible, but with the state the land was in, anybody with a pulse needed to pass their training. It didn't help that underqualified individuals were training these newbies at Autopia, and pretty much bad habits started to form. On top of all of this, we were going through a new contract with our union, and the company sort of forced all the new hires on the night side with all the veteran full-timers on the morning side. This pretty much meant all the new hires were working with each other and learning those bad habits from each other, without the veteran cast member to step in, and help guide them or even correct them. To add on, cars were starting to break down more frequently, and guests were on the rise of being extremely negative. I'm not going to get into guests here, as I have a whole video on that if you haven't listened to that already. To add on even further, a lot of these new people hated working Autopia, and they would do under the bare minimum. They wouldn't group their numbers properly, they wouldn't communicate with others efficiently, and they wouldn't just follow rotations properly. There were so many instances of these new people just not caring, and whenever a rotation came around, they would just go to a different position, or they would even just go backstage to chill or talk with their friends that happened to hire in at the same attraction as them. I will admit it here, there were a few individuals that cranked this up to the maximum, but there were also a few others that actually respected their job and did more than the bare minimum. It's just, the negative super outweighed the positive, and I will be getting into terrible coworkers in a moment. Honestly, I just wanted to pull my hair out with how idiotic some of these coworkers were at this attraction, and it drove me to end up hating this attraction that I once called my home. It may have been the attraction I started at, but it wasn't the one I finished at. Terrible coworkers. Every job has that one coworker that pretty much holds the entire team back, and if you know anything about Autopia, it's pretty much a team-based attraction. We all have to work together to keep everything running, or else the guests would do whatever the hell they want. I know I mentioned this in my recent side tangent video, but seriously, Autopia is a babysitter attraction, and the cast members are there just to make sure everyone goes where they need to go, as well as the cars are people powered. Without a person, the car doesn't go anywhere. I said person wrong. This is also the part of the video where I hope you have a basic understanding of the attraction and its positions, because I will be referencing them heavily now. So if for whatever reason you skipped the positions chapter, I would highly recommend listening to that as well as watching the surface level video too. If you do know, then I apologize for interrupting, and if you don't know, then go listen and watch those, please. I'm going to talk about grouping first before I touch on anything else. The hardest position at this attraction is probably the grouper. On paper, it sounds really easy to put people on some numbers, right? Well, it is for the most part, but some guests just don't listen, and sometimes it's up to the customers to correct it before it becomes a problem. Just to spoil you, it became a problem. A lot. I had various amounts of coworkers that would skip numbers, overgroup numbers, and or just ignore parties that came down the lift. It is vital for the grouper to walk up and down their platform to make sure they were accurate, but so many of them were just cocky and or lazy that they would continue grouping without, leaving the spot they would normally stand at. It was so bad at some points where some of the tracks were in literal standstills for minutes to even tens of minutes because their family got separated from their party, all because the grouper didn't care to look back that if their 5 had 2 groups instead of 1. There were these moments of standstills because their 4 was open but 5 and 6 weren't, and for some reason they would try to fill that empty car instead of moving their 4 and 5 up, and just having someone on track to move the 6 up to number 1. Yeah, they also didn't listen to their coworkers on track when they told them that a number was open, and when they had guests that were waiting near the lift to ride. This is where the communication aspect came into place, and some of them didn't know the basic hand signals that we are required to pass their training tests. It's vital these hand signals, guys, come on. I could go on even more about grouping, but I have other positions to cover. Track is another example of bad coworkers, and they wouldn't communicate with each other. Whenever we have to hold traffic on a certain track or to remove a vehicle, some of them wouldn't echo it out to each other. So you would have one track still running while everyone else has their traffic held while removing a vehicle. To give you an idea, all vehicle motion has to stop when removing a vehicle. Doesn't matter which track. The cast member on the first track in the upper half also is the person who drops the track switches. Sometimes this person would never show up, and others would just drop it without them, and they wouldn't put the track switches back up. Yeah, This actually happened more often than you thought. We had to close the attraction temporarily because of cast member error. You know, more often than you think. Let's also go ahead and talk about the position that wanders the attraction. Some coworkers of mine would just go and chat with the person that's stationed over near the Matterhorn, all while a stalled car is over on the other side of the attraction. There were also so many instances of coworkers hiding in the attraction out of guest view and to go and do whatever the hell on their phones. To give you an idea, being on a personal electronic device like a phone is a big no-no in attractions and could lead to immediate termination. Anyway, remember that stationary position near the Matterhorn? Well, they aren't supposed to leave until another person bumps them out. Well, sometimes the person here will just hop in a car with the guests and help them back to the station, basically abandoning their posts. They are there to make sure no cars stall out over in that area, as well as make sure no dum-dums hop the fence near the Matterhorn, which happens from time to time, believe it or not. The last bit of coworkers I want to complain about are the ones in the floater positions I mentioned earlier. Remember how I said they were supposed to give out water breaks or act productive around the attraction? Yeah, most of them would treat it like a free 10-minute break and piss off backstage or in the VIP room. This is why the VIP room was taken away so many times, as too many people abused it or they were caught doing stuff in there that I'm not going to say in this video. There was just so many lazy coworkers that felt like they could do whatever the hell they wanted, all while others were working their hardest. They wouldn't pass around rotations, which would cause breaks and lunches, and even clock out times to come late. If it tells you anything, missing a lunch is a fine the company has to pay, and leads and managers didn't like when someone hit their 5th hour because some dippy-doo was elsewhere. Now obviously I could keep going on and on and on about it, but it's time to switch gears and, focus on some individual coworkers of mine instead of being broad with them. Obviously, for legal reasons, no one will be named or identified. The only upside with these individuals I'm pointing out is they did get terminated for their attendance and or behavior, so there's at least that. Starting off with this ditzy coworker I had. I mean, both were ditzy, but this one was dumb ditzy while the other one was malicious ditzy. Anyway, this first coworker was notorious for being bad at their job. My first encounter with them was them making me late for my clock out time. The lead was actually in rotation because they were super short staffed, and this one coworker was supposed to be the one who let me go home, and they just came back from their break. Before you asked, no, they didn't take a longer break, but they just had a hard time finding me. Just to give you some context, I was in the position over near the Matterhorn, and my lead said someone should have been on their way 10 minutes ago. Well, my coworker that was wandering the attraction eventually found this person, and they were apparently walking back and forth on one of the bridges because they couldn't find where my position was. My coworker told this ditzy individual that if they just kept walking, they would have eventually made it to the part of the attraction I was at because, it's just one big loop. I was only 5 minutes late from clocking out that night, but it was just the beginning for this individual. I heard horror stories of this individual of accidentally bumping submarines at the Nemo attraction and power disconnecting star speeders over at Star Tours. And I was only lucky enough to deal with just this one instance, but I didn't really interact with this person after this occasion, but I heard the horror stories. Now on to the other ditzy individual. Talk about toxic in people's clothing. They try to act ditzy around other coworkers, but they were extremely malicious on the inside. They would act stupid when it came to their job, but if you tried correcting them, it would result in immediate hostility and backlash for helping them out. Luckily, my only serious interaction with the individual was adding on a vehicle. They held our traffic for over 20 minutes, only to add on a car that was from the maintenance storage and was not safe for use, especially with guests. They then looked at me like I was the one who did something wrong and told me to get a lead to remove the vehicle off the track. I had told them that they spent all this time only to give us a broken car. I told them to just go put it back, and that's when this guest just let them have it. I was like, yeah, you sort of deserve this, and I'm not going to lie. Especially because this little stunt they made, our line go from a 15-minute wait to a 60-minute wait. Like, it shouldn't take that long to add on a vehicle, and when you grab a broken vehicle, it just makes it another can of headaches or something like that. I don't freaking know. Honestly, I could keep going on and on about terrible coworkers at this attraction, but I want to mention more than half were not terrible. It's just the lack of care from management that really hurts this attraction, and the aftermath just happened to be lazy and toxic coworkers. That's where I'm going to switch gears and, head over to the next chapters. Bad operations. Bad operations at Autopia were becoming more present post-pandemic. On top of the coworkers I mentioned, the cars were starting to have more technical issues, and we had a new lightning lane system in place that made the attraction much busier than it used to be. I get adding Autopia to the lightning lane system makes it seem like guests got more of a value, but this is one of the few attractions where lightning lane really hurt the overall efficiency of the attraction, at least from my perspective. Oh yeah, because of the lightning lane addition, Autopia now operates during the rain as opposed to when we didn't have it. Both the tracks and the car's engines get a flooding problem which killed a lot of motors and caused a lot more derails because of hydroplaning. It was such a serious issue that the maintenance managers wanted Auto to stay closed, but the Tomorrowland managers were pretty much telling them to piss off. The cars were never meant to run in the rain and caused further issues to the vehicles than were already present. Obviously, it doesn't rain all the time in California, but remember there was a lot more rain in the past few years than there has been in a while. Also, even when it was raining, the longest the wait time would be was at most 10 minutes, which is pointless to even have a lightning lane for. The other thing is, guess that really halts the operations of the attraction. This was more in the queue versus the actual cars, but you see it happen daily here. I don't know what genius decided to cheap out on the lightning lane at this attraction, but it does not work in the queue, like at all. I mean, it works when it's not too busy, but when you get that one dingus of a guest that doesn't know where the hell they are, and they block the little room that there is, yeah, this sort of becomes an issue, like a fire hazard issue. I went into extensive detail about my disdain for this area in my surface level video, so I won't go into it here again. The other bad operations are just the fact that a big handful of cast members hate working this attraction. This attraction has some of the worst callouts in the entire land, and I don't really blame my coworkers entirely. It's hot, it's full of smog, and you have retarded guests being extra stupid. I know people aren't a fan of that word, but I don't know what idiot thinks it's a good idea to get out of their car. Like seriously, it doesn't help that some of my coworkers at this attraction froze up whenever they saw someone get out of their car and didn't react immediately. I know it's not happening as much as it used to, but it's still a serious issue at this attraction. Not only the cast member thing, but guests hopping out. There was even this one time where one of my friends who works at the attraction saw a guest side pedaling a car into the station, and everybody froze up when they saw that. I mean, I would have probably just busted out laughing, but at the same time, reacted accordingly and swiftly. I honestly don't blame my coworkers for the toxic guests, and even some of the stupid coworkers we had to deal with. I also want to mention this news of the attraction going electric in 2 years or so. Nothing was announced at D23 about it, and I believe that the company's spokesperson said that to make the attraction look good. I personally don't think it'll be in the next 2 years, as Auto is sort of a nothing attraction. Not many people care about this little car ride, both cast members and guests. It's a shame because it's a fantastic attraction for children to finally drive a car. I am, of course, biased here because I actually worked the attraction for over 4.5 years, but I do hope I get proven wrong and that it actually gets the refurbishment that it desperately needs. It doesn't need to be replaced, but it does need to be updated. Hell, even hydrogen cars would work, but this is just my assumption and I wanted to mention it in this video. Long story short is that Autopia works for the most part and just needs some love from their management team. I haven't been back to the park since I quit, so I have no idea how the attraction runs anymore. I mean, probably still the same, but from friends and acquaintances that still work it, it's gotten a tad worse with operations, but that's just the shame of it being a new hire attraction. It needs people that care, both on the operational side and the leadership side. That's going to wrap it up for this video podcast thingy. The next 2 episodes will be both on Monorail and working as a lead at Monorail. Monorail was pretty much my home attraction when I finally got to go back up there in mid-2022, and I was there until my very last day until very late 2023. It was the attraction that made me love coming to work, and unfortunately the same one that made me hate coming to work at the same time. That'll be for the next 2 episodes though. I sort of got somewhat of a format down for this arc, and we're slowly approaching the end of my cast member stories. After this arc will be a finale where I reflect upon the past year of no longer working there, and finally complete my journey as a cast member. Anyway, thank you for listening to this episode. If you liked it and want to help support my channel, go check out some of my other content. I have a variety of skits, films, and other series that you might enjoy. If not, you can always come back next month and listen to the next episode whenever that drops. I also have a video essay that I made on the parks and my overall opinions to the various changes that have happened that you might see as well as one of the end cards on screen right now. It's more visual than this series, but it can be easily enjoyed in the background if you choose to do that as well. Other than that, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.